Wembley Stadium, where England tried and failed to end 55 years of hurt, but their progress to the final of the European Championships lifted the spirits of a nation. It was exciting, inspiring, and utterly unpredictable. But when it comes to English club football, there's an altogether different story to tell. This is where my football team plays, the Hawthorns, home of West Bromwich Albion. And it's my home from home too. I've been coming here since 1975 and I still love it. But I'm going to let you into a little secret. And it's got nothing to do with how well or how badly my team is playing at any particular moment. But here's the truth. Football has become a little bit boring. That's not how the game sees itself, of course. It likes to present an image of a booming sport played out in packed stadiums to adoring fans, and ministers love it too. Whatever the spin doctors say, I'm a fan and I know the truth. There's something rotten in the state of English football. The British government seems to have belatedly recognised this. They've set up what they describe as a fan-led review of football governance, chaired by former Sports Minister Tracy Crouch. The review can't decide policy, only make recommendations, but its interim report calls for an independent regulator to oversee the game. The question is it already too late? The government got involved when a dozen clubs attempted to create a breakaway European Super League. Founder members of the Super League wouldn't have qualified according to what they achieved on the field. They'd have been chosen by themselves and could never be relegated, defying the laws of sporting gravity. Whatever went up would never come down. 6 were from England: Liverpool, Manchester United, Manchester City, Spurs, Arsenal and Chelsea.
Be no doubt that we don't support it and support the creation of this European Super League. I think it's not in the interests of fans, it's not in the interests of football. How can it be right to have a situation in which you create a kind of cartel that stops clubs competing against each other, playing against each other properly, with all the hope and excitement that gives to fans up and down the country? I think it offends against the basic principles of competition.
The so-called Big Six were trying to maximise their wealth at the expense of smaller, weaker rivals. Classic free market capitalism. Strangely, Prime Minister Boris Johnson, despite being the leader of the party of capitalism, railed against it. He didn't mind spaffing millions up the wall on an outsourced test and trace scheme that didn't really work. He didn't mind handing millions of pounds of taxpayers' cash to government cronies. He didn't mind locking down too late, contributing to thousands of needless deaths. But here's the thing, Boris Johnson did object to a plan that would have messed with one of our most beloved institutions, the local football club. Some people called it the save of the season. I think I'm dead. Others saw it as naked opportunism. Either way, what exactly was preserved? By helping to kill off the Super League and saving the Premier League, Boris Johnson was credited with rescuing the entire pyramid of English football. This allows the smallest club in the land to start at the bottom and dream of climbing to the summit. Charlie Methven, now co-owner of Sunderland, saw the dream realised firsthand with his boyhood club Oxford United.
Aldridge, who's got Hebbert waiting in the middle. Back again for John Aldridge. Lining up the shot. Pushed down, Jeremy Charles. That's 3. And that's victory.
Oxford, when I was 5 or 6, began a dizzying ascent up the pyramid. And I lived the dream. You know, every year Oxford got promoted. They then got promoted to the top division. And in their first year in the top division, they won a major trophy. And in those years, they beat Man United, they beat Liverpool, they beat Arsenal, and I watched it all. I was perhaps too young to appreciate what had happened. But for my grandfather, who had been involved with the club when they were an amateur club or a non-league club in the 1950s and 1960s, you'd see a lot of Oxford fans in tears at what had been achieved and what had been built, and the fact that, as I said, from Village Club to Wembley in 20 years, the dream was alive, and that was a dream that could be easily believed in by supporters of almost any club.
But that was then, this is now. The financial gap between the biggest clubs and the rest has grown so wide, Charlie says that if an Oxford United were to reach the Premier League these days, their only ambition would be simply to survive there. It's no longer a dream of glory. Clubs fear the nightmare of relegation.
It's a very strange dream when you think about it, that you start off the season thinking, my dream is that we won't be amongst the 3 worst. And yet that is, these days, what passes for a dream for an awful lot of the Premier League clubs. And in the Championship, an awful lot of the clubs there dream of becoming a club whose dream is not being amongst the worst 3 clubs. And I think this is insidious and toxic, and is gradually taking the genuine jeopardy out of the sport, which will have a deleterious long-term impact on the competitiveness and therefore the attractiveness of the sport.
Don't just take Charlie's word for it. I've come to meet some of my fellow Albion supporters. We've just been relegated from the Premier League to the Championship, which you might expect would leave us devastated. Instead, many fans are looking forward to playing in a lower division.
Being in the Championship, it's nice to be involved in a competition that you've got an outside chance of winning, isn't it? In the Premier League at the moment, we virtually know that only certain teams are going to win it, aren't they?
We all know who the top 6 teams are going to be. We all know who the middle teams are going to be, and we all know who they're going to be in the relegation fight.
I don't want to be cannon fodder anymore, and that's what I really, really dislike and despise about the way the Premier League is set up.
When you're in the top flight, you try not to lose. When you're in the Championship, you've got to try and win, and that's how it is for Albion.
I'm looking forward to it, and probably more so than I'd be looking forward to it if we managed to stay up.
So getting relegated from the Premier League isn't the devastating blow that people might think it is?
Not at all. No, not at all.
One of the least popular innovations in the Premier League has been VAR, the Video Assistant Referee, which adjudicates on controversial moments in the match from a studio miles from where it's being played. VAR doesn't operate in the Football League.
In cricket, it works perfectly well, all the technology in cricket. In football, no.
It ruins the spontaneity of going to a football match, I think. So, be glad to be done with that next season.
Then there are the endless fixture rearrangements to suit TV.
Who wants to go and see a game at 5 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon? You know, and you've got the same on a Monday evening. We've just pandered to the big boys and the big television companies who are selling the rights to the game, you know, and selling basically the game down the pan, really, in my opinion.
One of the worst aspects of the Premier League is the temptation for clubs like mine to play boring defensive football to avoid relegation. We've hired managers who don't excite the fans, but who are regarded, wrongly as it happened, as survival specialists. Surely football has got to be about more than avoiding defeat. Of course, as a supporter, you want your club to do as well as they can, to test themselves against the best, and that means playing in the top division. But once you arrive there, you quickly realise it's a competition you have no chance of winning. It wasn't always like that. In the 1980s, 13 different clubs finished in the top 4 of the old First Division, including Watford, Ipswich and my club West Brom. In the decade starting 2010, just 7 clubs occupied the top 4 places. So what happened? It all dates back to 1992 when the top 20 clubs in England broke away from the Football League and created their own elite competition, the Premier League. The timing of the new competition was no coincidence. Satellite TV was just emerging in the UK, enabling companies like Sky to put football behind a paywall. To watch, fans had to take out an expensive subscription. This generated untold riches, and by setting up a new, separate league, the top clubs could hold on to more of it. Kieran Maguire is a football finance expert at Liverpool University.
They wanted to keep more money for themselves. They also wanted to not be part of a gang of 92. They want to be part of a gang of 20 because that would allow them to concentrate the income in the hands of fewer clubs. Commercially, it makes sense. From a business perspective, you see the logic behind that. But from the point of view of supporting a club in the fourth division and hoping to get up to the Premier League, that has become more difficult. It's not impossible. Bournemouth have done it and other clubs have done it. So, and Wigan have been there and come back and so on. So it still exists to a degree in terms of getting to the Premier League. But if you talk to any fan of the non-elite clubs, they will all tell you the same thing. It's better to travel than to arrive, because once you're there, you're looking for 10 victories a season to avoid relegation and hopefully to get one decent result against the big six a year, or two if you're really lucky. That's not football.
Before 1992, TV income was divided 92 ways. Not exactly equally, but much more equally than it is now. Since the arrival of the Premier League, the cake has grown much bigger, thanks to those TV subscriptions. But the bulk of the money is split just 20 ways. That means bigger slices, but only for those fortunate enough to be at the top table. There's so much money in the Premier League that even clubs who finish bottom receive almost £100 million each. TV income for clubs in the Championship amounts to around just £7 million each. That means for clubs like mine, football has become a game of keepy-uppy. If you get to the Premier League, the aim is simply to keep yourself up there. Desperation to reach the Premier League has created an inflationary bubble below it, with owners spending money they haven't got in an attempt to get there. At the last count, Championship clubs had combined debts of more than £1 billion, and that was before COVID hit. But they can't all get into the Premier League, and when the bubble bursts, that leaves some clubs massively in debt. Since 1992, 48 league or recent league clubs have gone into administration or entered an insolvency agreement. That's more than half of them. Some have disappeared altogether, robbing their local community of the chance of watching league football. At the other end of the scale, the wealth generated by the Premier League has attracted global high rollers. They include the Abu Dhabi royal family, who has spent more than £1 billion on buying players since taking over Manchester City in 2008. In that time, City have won 13 trophies, including 5 Premier League titles, 2 FA Cups and 6 League Cups. It's known as sports washing. All that money, all that glamour, all those trophies, providing a counter-narrative to the lack of political freedom and human rights abuses back home. Then there's Chelsea, who have won 17 major trophies, including the Champions League twice and 5 Premier League titles since 2003. That's since they were bought by the Russian Roman Abramovich, who has spent £2 billion on transfers. He made his money in the chaotic years after the fall of communism. Close links to the Kremlin helped Abramovich buy a significant share in the oil company Sibneft for £100 million, estimated to be around a sixth of its real value.
Those two owners, Abramovich at Chelsea and Sheikh Mansour at Man City, have enabled those two clubs to elbow their way past some clubs who are arguably bigger than them to create this top six and then pull up the drawbridge behind them.
The Premier League wasn't too worried where the money came from. It laid out the welcome mat. Likewise for the US investors who currently bankroll Liverpool, Arsenal and Manchester United, and Spurs owner Joe Lewis, born in Britain but now a tax exile in the Bahamas. Wealth from owners based overseas has ensured that in the Premier League, an elite within the elite has developed. A small group of clubs who, season after season, monopolise qualification for the European Champions League, which brings with it, yes, more money.
The Premier League TV deal itself is very lucrative, but the Champions League deal is equally lucrative. So if a club is already in the top four, it's getting a number of advantages. First of all, it's playing more fixtures. So therefore you've got more match day money coming in, and that money tends to be at higher prices, especially in the Champions League. Secondly, you've got the additional up to £100 million of prize money coming from UEFA in the Champions League, which allows you to go out and buy the players, to recruit and retain the manager, which means that the likes of Watford and Palace and Brighton, who are presently in the Premier League, they can't compete, so therefore they don't even have the ambition to try to compete at that elite level.
So the level of rewards for finishing in the top four ensure, or almost ensure, that the teams who are in the top four continue to stay in the top four.
That's right.
Over the last decade, English clubs have been allocated 41 Champions League slots. 40 of those have gone to Big Six clubs. In any other industry, we'd call that a monopoly. There are, of course, exceptions to every rule, and Leicester City have gatecrashed the monopoly of the Big Six. By doing so, they have gladdened the heart of every football fan. But when they won the league in 2016, they were the first team from outside the Big Six to win the title for more than 20 years. And when they won the FA Cup in 2021, they were one of only 3 teams from outside the Big Six to have won it for more than 30 years.
If Leicester or the equivalent of Leicester was happening once every 5 or 6 years, it wouldn't be the exception that proved the rule. It would be happening often enough that you'd say, it's not a rule. No, they were one-off, and that exception, the fact that it is so exceptional, means that there is now a rule. And the rule is that unless you're in the Big Six, you're not allowed to win any of these trophies. Because it's not just the league we're talking about, it's the cups as well.
Get in the tackle! Go on, get stuck in! Good ball! Good ball! Go on, cross it! Now, the Premier League does give some money to the lower levels of football, but clubs in League One and League Two are given less than £30 million to share between them. Manchester United alone are reported to have paid agent Mino Raiola £40 million for the transfer of Paul Pogba. These vast discrepancies in wealth leave smaller clubs like League One Accrington Stanley playing catch-up.
What they do, they funnel in the money higher to the top 6, and they're creating big gaps further down the pyramid and funding gaps, because every time you talk about Man United, and no matter how much cash they have or how much they've got available to spend, then players will take it. Them agents will take it, they'll pay it. We know the row I had about Pogba and Raiola and him taking 40 odd million in transfer fees on a player at 90 million. What that does is inflate wages all the way down. It inflates the cost for everybody. So the knock-on effect is like a domino. When they set a bigger fee higher up, sets wage expectations right down through the Championship, from Championship right down to League One, to League Two, and all the way down, and even non-league down to paying daft money. So what you've got is a real hyperinflation going on to match the extra cash that's coming into the game.
Now, you might say, why do big clubs need to give smaller ones anything at all? Major supermarkets don't subsidise the local corner shop. But football really is different. If clubs drove all their rivals out of business, ultimately, you'd have no sport at all. It also makes a vital difference to the national team. When England played Italy in the Euro 2020 final, 10 of the 11 players who started the match owed at least part of their development to a Football League side, Declan Rice being the only exception. Yet the Premier League is seen as the be-all and end-all of most clubs' ambition, and the desire to get there has sapped the joy from the oldest cup competition in the world, the FA Cup. Lorraine and Dawn Astle know what it's like to enjoy an FA Cup win. Jeff Astle, who played for my team West Brom, was Dawn's dad and Lorraine's husband.
One of the things I was looking forward to was to sing Abide With Me. Then you got up and stood for the Wembley hymn, the Wembley anthem. And I wanted, to stand and sing Abide With Me, knowing that Jeff was at the bottom of the tunnel. Sorry, I'm getting a bit emotional. Thinking of Abide With Me. And they started up the music, the introduction. And suddenly, from nowhere, tears streamed down my face. I never sang a word.
Wembley, the Cup Final 1968. 100,000 pairs of eyes focused on the skills of 22 men, the Cup heroes of Everton and West Bromwich Albion. The way play had gone so far, 100,000 people might have been witnessing the first draw in the 40 years of Wembley finals. It was full time. Into extra time, Everton kicked off. 22 tired men desperate for a winning goal. Albion coming away, a promising raid. Astle banged one in, hit the rebound, goal!
Jeff, who scored in every round of the tournament, won the game for Albion.
The first shot Jeff took, everyone stood up in front of me. And Alan, James, and he was a son, Alan and Rosie James, they were the son of Clive James, the director. And they sat in front of me. And Alan had jumped up thinking the first shot Jeff had was going in, but it hit Ray Wilson and rebound back to Jeff. And of course, and Alan hadn't sat down in time because it all happened in seconds. So I knew we'd scored. I'd got a clue we'd scored. And Alan turned round, wrapped his arms around my waist and literally hauled me out my seat. And I said, who scored? He said, Jeff scored. And he literally bodily went, woof, picked me up, and I'm sort of dangling in midair. He gave me such a bear hug. I can see to this day.
The final whistle was conclusive. West Bromwich Albion were FA Cup winners of 1968. But up at the Royal Box, the lads from West Brom knew the feeling of glory as Princess Alexandra presented the cup to jubilant Williams. This was that magic football moment.
What did it mean for a club like West Brom and a town like West Bromwich to win the FA Cup?
I think it meant everything to them. If you speak to fans that were there that day, they remember every minute of it. I've got a friend who always says he went to Wembley with his dad, and he says, and I shall never forget, he says that night waiting for the coaches to come and take them home at Marble Arch, he said, I watched my dad singing and dancing, and I'd never seen him do that before. He said, and I'd never seen him so happy. And he said, I shall always be grateful for Jeff for that.
These days, clubs like mine don't even try to win the FA Cup. Not really. If you're in the Premier League, directors are desperate to stay there. If you're in the Championship, they're desperate to get there. The Cup has secondary status, and key players are usually rested.
Well, I think it's plain to see that the FA Cup's a shadow of what it once was, and that pretty much coincides with the period of the Premier League. And the reason for that actually is quite straightforward. The fact that the Premier League gives all of its clubs £120 million a year means that being in the Premier League is a massive driver of capital growth for a football club. So, for instance, if you were to take your club, Adrian, West Bromwich Albion in the Premier League is worth maybe £150 million. West Bromwich Albion in the Championship is worth maybe £50 million. So there's a £100 million gap between what that club's worth in the Premier League and what it's worth in the Championship. And therefore, they want their best players to be fit for the crucial league games that determine whether they're worth £150 million or £50 million, which then means that they can't then strategically justify playing their best players in the League Cup and the FA Cup, because if one of those players gets injured playing in the FA Cup and therefore doesn't play in the league games, and that is the thing that means that West Brom either don't retain or don't attain the Premier League status, that's a £100 million call. Now, financially, let's have a look at what winning the FA Cup does for you. Basically nothing. Basically nothing at all.
With the advent of the carpet bombing, what we have effectively these days, of live television, an FA Cup match is just another football match. And the money involved in terms of winning the FA Cup, that's around about £3.5 million. £3.5 million, a lot of money, of course. It's the equivalent of the difference between finishing 14th and 16th in the Premier League. So it's not significant. It's the equivalent of being in the last 16 or the last 8 of the Champions League. So from the club's point of view, progress in the FA Cup isn't as significant. Therefore, from their point of view, surely we should put more effort into A, avoiding relegation, and B, trying to get into a Europa League place or Champions League place, because that's going to make us a lot more money. Survival in the Premier League is so much more lucrative financially than FA Cup success. The FA Cup has fallen down the pecking order.
Now, you might think that if supporters like me are unhappy, these must be glory days for followers of the Big Six. Not a bit of it. Many of them are as frustrated as me at the state of the game. Take Arsenal, a massive club, but one which starts every season without any realistic chance of winning the Premier League, but who hope to qualify for the Champions League, which they also then almost certainly won't win. Like many top English clubs, they have an owner, Stan Kroenke, who seems to view the club primarily as a financial investment. He's not usually at the Emirates cheering on the Gunners, but instead follows events from his base in the United States. Kevin Witcher runs the Gooner website, which in 2019 issued a challenge to Kroenke, saying, "We care, do you?"
There's a definite perception that Stan Kroenke is an owner that doesn't seem to really care too much about the football side of the club. He says he wants to win things, but there's no evidence in anything he does that that's the case. So people want to put pressure to create a change in the culture of the club, so that the complacency we've seen for too many years, where profit was enough, just making Champions League was good enough because the balance books looked really good.
As a football fan, it would be my dream to own my football club. If I did own my club, I'd make sure I was there every game, home and away. What's it like to have an owner who doesn't have the same commitment as I do, or as you undoubtedly do as a fan, to the club that you love?
The impression you get is that it's an investment vehicle for him. And because of the value of the club, he can use that to offset against loans, for example, to do other things. But I'm not sure he really gets football, to be honest.
Long-distance owners have spoiled the fun at Manchester United too, where fans who had shares in their club were blown out of the water when the US-based Glazer family bought the club. The Glazers are reported to have taken more than £1 billion from United in interest and fees since assuming control in 2005, and they used their financial clout to push out fans who had previously owned shares.
We had a leverage buyout at Manchester United by the Glazer family, and all our shares were compulsory purchased. We didn't want to sell them. We didn't want them taking offers, but they were compulsory purchase. We fought against that. Unfortunately, with the rules of the stock exchange at the time, there's nothing we could do, and we were powerless. It felt as if supporters were paying for the Glazers' ownership of the club, and it created this disconnect between supporters and the club. With supporters having shares, it's actually about feeling part of the club, and it's an emotional investment. So you're not looking at the price of the shares and the fluctuations in the stock market. You want to feel valued by the club and feel part of the club. Football's a massive revenue generator. It means a lot in people's lives. You know, when there's the World Cup or some big sporting tournament, MPs, Prime Ministers, Ministers are great to, you know, stick a scarf on and come along and be seen, you know, being photographed with players, with supporters, and riding the, you know, crest of a wave at a World Cup with all the good feeling. Get behind what it really means for football supporters, that sense of community, the camaraderie, you know, generations of people, not only from one walk of life, but from every walk of life. People who I know, who I wouldn't meet in any ordinary, you know, my ordinary day. You know, it's a great equaliser, it's a great thing, it's a real positive thing, football. And there are elements of it that need to be protected. Clubs should be protected. They shouldn't be used as a cash cow, and supporters' interests should be protected also.
No one milked England's success at Euro 2020 more than Boris Johnson, who draped himself in an England flag at every opportunity. Now, if Boris Johnson really wants to be radical, he could follow Germany's example and insist that clubs have to be more than 50% owned by supporters. Fans love it. It's the Bundesliga, not the Premier League, that has the highest attendances in Europe. Now, that really would be taking back control. But can you honestly imagine Johnson telling a band of global billionaires to sell or even give away their prized football shares? Tracy Crouch's independent review slams football's poor financial controls, reckless behaviour by owners, and an unwillingness of the authorities to intervene. It talks about the need for better financial oversight of the game and a golden share, allowing fans to veto changes to their badge or kit colours. It even identifies that there is currently no single body responsible for stewarding the game. But it doesn't challenge the root cause of the sport's fundamental inequality, the creation of the Premier League. Even if it did, can you see a government which wouldn't provide free school meals for poor kids over the summer holiday legislating to close the gap between rich and poor in football? Or empowering a regulator to stop crazy kick-off times that suit broadcasters but not the fans? But unless he does take radical action, it's hard to see why anything should change. We need to create a football world in which everyone has a fair chance of winning. So here is my manifesto. Let's have an independent regulator with the power to punish rogue directors and ban them if necessary. We also need fairer sharing of TV income and gate money, salary caps to ensure proper competition, a ban on clubs running up unsustainable debts, 51% fan ownership of every club, agreement with fans over changes to kick-off times. Without these changes, the game of keepy-uppy will continue until we all decide to give up and do something more interesting instead.